Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to this Purple Space, Purple Light Up NHS special for Purple Light Up Day, which is the 3rd of December. And it's lovely to have you here with us. We're very excited to be part of this global broadcast going out across the world. And the purpose of today's panel session is for us to talk about what we within the NHS, within the UK, have been doing to create an inclusive workplace for disabled staff. So we're going to talk about what an inclusive environment looks like within the NHS. We're going to share some personal stories and some personal and organisational stories about how we've supported staff, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we've done that hopefully that might encourage you and might motivate you to change some of the ways that you do things within your organisations. So I'm really, really pleased to be joined today by 4 colleagues from different parts of the country. So I've got with me Chris Oakes, who is Director of HR and Organisational Development at Northamptonshire NHS Foundation Trust. I've got Christine Rivers, who leads on the Workforce Disability Equality Standard for NHS England and NHS Improvement. And so she works at a policy level nationally. I've got Susan Smith with us, and Susan is Director of Nursing and also Chair of the Disability Network for the North East London Foundation Trust, also known as NELFT. And we've got Glyn Rowland with us, who is a co-chair of the Purple Network for Cambridge University Hospitals. So welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you here with us today. And I'm going to open the conversation. I'm going to turn to Christine first of all, actually, because Christine, you'll know, working at that national policy level, that a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment around disability is driven by the Workforce Disability Equality Standard that I mentioned. Could you just talk very broadly to people about what that Workforce Disability Equality Standard is and what it's trying to do and achieve?
So yes, the Workforce Disability Equality Standard is part of the NHS's drive to improve the experiences of disabled staff who work in the NHS. The NHS is the 2nd largest employer in Europe, the 5th largest in the world. So there's a big workforce there, 1.3 million people roughly. And because the NHS is one organisation, it means that we can standardise the data that we collect across all employees of the NHS. So what we do is we have a series of 10 metrics. We use people's personal staff records, and we use the staff survey. And we collect that data nationally and provide a national report. At the same time, we also ask trusts to look at their own data and produce an action plan that will make a difference. So some examples of the metrics are things like where disabled staff are across the workforce, whether they believe they have equal opportunities for employment, board representation, whether staff feel valued at work, disabled staff. So those are some examples and a very quick example of what the WDES is.
No, that's great. Thank you, Chris. That very high level explanation will just give people, I think, a sense of what we're trying to do. And as you say, it's a huge, huge organisation. Obviously, each of us here is coming at this conversation from a different perspective. We all work in our own separate organisations, but we're all part of a big family. And you know, we talk about the NHS as being a big family, and we sort of we relish that, and we're very proud of that. And quite recently, there's been a major publication which, Chris, I'd like to talk to you about. So there's a major publication for the NHS, which is the People Plan. So this was a publication which basically outlined a workforce strategy for the NHS for the next 5 to 10 years. And in that People Plan, it talks about creating an NHS where people feel as though they belong. And I wonder, Chris, if I can turn to you, what your understanding of that concept of belonging is. What does belonging mean to you?
As for organisations, I think they want to create an environment where people can perform and do their jobs effectively. And I think one of the most important elements of that's empowering staff. And I suppose in Northampton, our kind of rationale behind that, we call it distributed leadership. So enabling all of our staff to be leaders and make the right decisions. But if this is what we want to do, we do need to create an environment where people feel safe and secure in doing this. They need to feel supported and that they can align with the organisation's goals and values. And I think for that, I think they need to belong. We need to feel comfortable, have a sense of belonging when we feel safe to be ourselves and actually, to act as that leader. And I think this is particularly important for disabled staff because unconsciously an organisation can take action to exclude them. If, for example, a member of staff has hearing loss, if they're not given the right equipment or the organisations and colleagues don't adjust to their needs, this creates an environment where a colleague can't perform to their best. I certainly heard staff have this experience. But yeah, when we embrace disabled staff and don't see it as a barrier, they can fully contribute and participate, and that feeling safe and that belonging, I think, is an essential part of that. So I think in that belonging piece, it's really important organisations remove barriers that may prevent disabled staff from feeling they belong and feeling that they're part of the organisations and aligned to its need. And I think a key part to that is responding to that additional support and providing it. And just for an organisation to be ready to give the right support. And I think that's a key message for us at NHFT, Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust. I think put simply at the end of all that, it's people who feel they belong, give of their best. And that's why I think fundamentally just so massively important, as you highlighted, Paul.
No, that's a nice way to summarise it, actually. And one of the ways, as you know, Chris, that we try and do that, and lots of organisations try to do that, is through disability networks. So, Glyn, I'm going to come to you in a moment, because Chris is talking a lot there about enabling staff, empowering staff, encouraging staff to be themselves and bring their whole selves to work, which presumably is what you're trying to do through your disability network. So what does belonging mean to you, Glyn, when you hear that word?
Well, belonging to me basically meant you being equal to everybody else, not actually being, oh, I can't do that because of this. You want to be able to feel part of a group, a team, and the whole network. We often find people with disabilities are actually talked down to, or in my case with deafness, people go, well, she can understand. She does understand. It just takes a little bit longer to figure it out. But it's always you having to feel that you have to prove yourself, or we are not believed on a lot of things as well. That can actually help people sort of feel rather sort of disconnected instead of being part of a team. So basically, instead of being talked down to and whatnot, that they feel, I think, basically as an equal, and you are as good as anybody else.
Fantastic, thank you. And Susan, you've got the privilege of holding two separate roles, I think, within your organisation. So you're a director of nursing, but you're also chairing the disability network as well. So again, you obviously think about these things from those two perspectives. But so what does belonging mean to you?
I mean, I think, I think Chris and Glyn have both said it very well. But I think for me, I think we have a different language around disabled staff. And I think that's sometimes a barrier, and we talk about reasonable adjustments. Now, if somebody comes into our organisation and we give them a laptop, we don't call that a reasonable adjustment. We just assume that they need a laptop to do their job, in the same way that if you need text help or dragon. You know, it's not an adjustment. It's not something extra. And I think a lot of the awareness raising we've done, particularly with managers, is about recognizing that we're not, you know, it's not about giving people something extra or not giving them an easier time if we're asking for flexible working for people. It's the same as giving them a laptop, the same as giving them PPE. It's what we need to give people to be able to do the job to their best of their ability. So there's something about the language we use is a bit of a barrier, and it's all being extra and making people feel like they don't quite belong, that they need to have something different, you know, and we all need different things to do our job, and it's recognizing that everybody is the same in that they all need different things to do their job. So we try and do a lot of awareness raising with people, because and you know, looking at managers particularly who are often the people who are having to look at what somebody needs to be able to do their job, and making sure that they know what's available to support them. Because if we're not supporting them, then they're unable to support the staff who are working in their teams. And that's really important. And we find that managers will often shy away from employing staff with disabilities because they're scared that they won't know what to do, that it will take more time, that they're going to have somebody who's got these constant needs and is always off sick. And actually, we do a lot of myth busting, looking at people with disabilities, you know, who do often tend to have less sickness than the rest of the, you know, the population, certainly in our trust when we've looked at individuals, you know. So really myth busting with managers around, you know, what somebody with a disability is going to need to fulfill their potential.
And presumably, Susan, you are also thinking about this from a patient perspective as well, as a director of nursing. So what different things do you have to think about there when you're thinking about patients as well?
I think, and I think anybody who's worked in the NHS will recognise this for a long time. When we set up a new service, you know, or we set up a new ward or something, we kind of, you know, we get the architects in, and you know, we look at all the nice drawings, and then we say, oh God, we need to have a disabled toilet, you know, and it always kind of comes in a bit last. Rather than thinking about accessibility. And if it's accessible for somebody with a disability, then the chances are it's going to be accessible for everybody. And really trying to change the narrative again around, you know, from disability to accessibility, and thinking about what people need. You know, and I mean, my sort of background's in mental health, you know, so we often have staff, a bit like me, who are very old, who didn't have a lot of training in kind of physical health, long-term conditions and disability. So they're really playing catch up, and it's supporting people to, you know, to come on board and to really start thinking differently and looking at things differently, and trying to look at, you know, things in a kind of more accessible way. What would make this more accessible for you, for your patients? So that's a lot of the work we do.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's interesting actually, Christine, isn't it? Because you and I, we had lots of conversations about what is a disability. And there's this constant, I think, need for education that Susan's describing there. So what are your thoughts? Because often, you know, you mentioned mental health, Susan, and that's often the one, isn't it, Christine, that gets forgotten sometimes when you're talking about disability. So what do you think? What do you think you're trying to? Because obviously you've been involved with developing the people plan. You've been involved in trying to develop this concept of belonging. What do you think we need to do to help people better understand what a disability is?
I think certainly belonging is seeing yourself within the organisation, and we know that around 70% of people using NHS services are themselves disabled. And if we don't see disabled people, and disabled people don't feel relaxed and part of the workforce, and that their disability is something that they can talk authentically about, then that's the workforce then doesn't reflect the patient group, and we're losing the many talents and abilities and discussions that can arise from people who feel their authentic selves and can bring that into their workforce. I think because disability is hidden, I think that means it is harder, and that's why the conversations are so important, that we don't just bring disabled people into the workforce, but we talk about disability so that so that disabilities aren't so hidden. And there's some parallels with LGBT there. There's a lot of research saying that bringing your authentic self to work is really important. And there's also mental health consequences for people that don't do that. So I guess in terms of policy, I think it's about having disability more visible, using role models, facilitating and supporting those discussions, and also supporting networks. So disabled leaders, disabled chairs, disabled staff, making sure that networks can support all of those voices to speak with and to the organisation and plan actions that can make a difference as well.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Glyn, I could see you nodding there. I'm going to come to you now because yeah, I think you were nodding when Christy was talking about hidden disabilities particularly. What's your experience around hidden disabilities?
Hidden disability is very confusing, I think, for anybody, because you're perceived as being capable of practically doing everything as what is considered, I guess, a normal person, if I can use that term. A disability that isn't visible is very, very challenging. And I must admit, I like to make it known of my disability because it's not visible. And I find I get on a lot better by saying to people, okay, guess what? I'm profoundly deaf. And they go, oh, but you don't sound it. This is the first one I get. I had a very gracious mother who taught me how to speak properly, even though I couldn't hear. And she taught me how to lip read. She wasn't trained or anything. She just didn't want me to go through school feeling left out. So it's a hidden disability, I think, is a very large bridge to cross for a lot of people. And they expect me, I'm sitting here, hi, but I have a disability. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on a little bit. A lot of what we're talking about here is around values and behaviours. And again, within the NHS, we pride ourselves, I think, on, hoping that, we do demonstrate and espouse good values and hopefully practice good behaviours. So I'm going to come to Chris. Because Chris, as a Director of HR and Organisational Development, I know it's a big responsibility of yours to think about this whole thing about values and behaviours. So, and I know you've done a lot of work at Northamptonshire Healthcare around this. So can you talk to us a bit about some of the things you've done around that and what your expectations are of your managers in terms of practicing good behaviours and showing good values? And we'll need a microphone to hear you, I think. So
there you go.
Thank you.
The famous phrase in COVID. You're I think a key element summed up in a phrase I often use, which is that my experience is only one experience. So thinking that other people will have different experiences to me is so important to recognise, because I think one of those key behaviours is you need to appreciate things from others' perspectives. I think Glyn was just talking us through that there, wasn't she? That, where she's coming from is different and maybe people don't recognise that. And I think the value of seeking to understand is so important to enabling an organisation to see what is needed for staff to feel, again, as we said, we're talking about belonging and being inclusive. Understanding that, I think, is essential. I think we might come on to, I think this is where reverse mentoring is such a powerful tool. And certainly in Northampton, we've used that with our BME staff, but now we're looking to use that with our disabled staff. And I believe it's only truly through understanding someone's perspective are you're going to be able to get the best out of them, and you're going to have the sort of communication you need. And as you say, at Northampton, we've done an awful lot of work on that from the bottom up of the organisation, talking to staff. Staff defined a range of leadership behaviours, which I said earlier, you know, everybody's a leader, and there are 4 of them. But one of the important ones is working together. It's an essential part of what we expect of everybody. And it's all important because that's not, because it's part of our culture and people have recognised it's part of our culture. It's not something we're always telling people. That's something that people start to expect, and it's how it should be around here. But then we go on to define that, and that's about, it's defined and we expect it's about showing compassion, care and kindness. It's about inviting others to tell you and listening to others' views, about valuing each other's contribution and diversity. And I think emphasising these behaviours and focusing on them, I think we've seen that in Northampton, and others have commented externally. That does allow staff to, as we've said, bring their whole self to work. And I think, as we're all talking about, that if you do that, that's when you get so much more out of people, and also everyone. You know, not just it's not just disabled staff or staff with long-term conditions. It's all staff that's the benefit for. So I think that's important. That plays to the point that we were talking about, you know, you expect to give people a laptop. And I think, you know, with the behaviours, what you expect and what's needed for disabled staff is what other staff expect and need. And if you can start to move the conversation and the cultural emphasis onto that, I think you just see the benefit all around.
Yeah. So we've talked about laptops, as you say, and obviously in that respect, we've all faced lots of challenges around remote working, particularly over the last 9 months or so. Susan, I know you've done some quite radical stuff at Nelft in terms of accommodating people for these things, and you talked about reasonable adjustments earlier. Can you talk to us about some of the challenges you faced as an organisation during COVID and how you've responded to those?
I mean, I think what was interesting for us initially in the pandemic was we have a very small number of staff who've actually declared a disability or long-term condition, either on ESR or on the staff survey every year. And what we suddenly discovered during the pandemic was that we had a lot of staff who had long-term conditions and a lot of people who had to shield. And in a way, it was kind of really good that we found that out, because a lot of those people then had to work from home. And we then had to start looking at reasonable adjustments for working at home for people. Now, for the people who had already had things like equipment, and reasonable adjustments isn't just equipment, but we all recognize equipment. For the people who had equipment, we hired a courier service to actually deliver chairs, keyboards, and anything that you had in your office space, in your workspace, to deliver them to your home if that was suitable for you. Because you know, some of these things are quite bulky, but we kind of did what we could, and we tried to get things out to people quite quickly. The other thing we did was trying to then, people who needed reasonable adjustments at home, do those assessments online. With people face to face on Zoom or Teams, to find out what it was they were going to need to be able to work at home. So some people, you know, we found that people who had long-term conditions, they might be spine musculoskeletal, were suddenly sitting on their sofa working on a laptop on a coffee table. And that's not going to work for anybody for very long. So, you know, being able through the network to get in touch with people and say to them, okay, well, we can get you some equipment out if that's going to help you, and be able to sit with them and work through what it was they were going to need online, you know, where it was possible to actually do face-to-face things with people, and then get that ordered and delivered to them as soon as possible, so that they didn't feel like we were just sending them home. Because I think what we felt very strongly with all of our staff that had to shield was that they wanted to do their bit. They didn't want to feel like they'd just gone home and they hadn't contributed. You know, so it was really important that we were able to support them to do that. And that's been really successful. And what it's done is it's really grown the network, because we've done our network meetings through Zoom and Teams. And to be honest, we were getting 10, 15 people every month, and now we're getting 60 or 70 people. who are actually coming on, talking about some of the challenges they've been facing for years. And again, it comes back to language. They'd never seen themselves as disabled, but they suddenly realized that they had needs that we could accommodate, and that actually the network was a really good place to bring that and to get that support. So that's been really positive for us.
That's really interesting. And sorry, Glyn, do you want to say something? No, it's all right. I saw the yellow box come up around you and I thought you were going to say something.
No, but I didn't say anything then at all.
That's fine. So this is that's really interesting what you said there, Susan, because Christine, these are some of the things that we've started to find, aren't they, in the survey that you're just in the middle of analysing at the moment. So do you want to talk about the big survey that you've done across the NHS, and maybe about some of the initial things that have come up from that?
Yeah, so the analysis is still taking place. So I can only really give you some general thoughts, and it will be a published report, hopefully in the new year. So anyone that wants to read it will be able to do so. We've worked in conjunction with Paul and NHS employers on this, and we sent out a survey to disabled staff in the NHS. We've had around 4,500 responses, and we asked about areas such as risk assessment, shielding, working from home, and people's experiences of needing adjustments at home. Also whether people have moved roles, maybe working from home but in a different role, or needed to move roles and either working from home or working in an office. And it's specifically focused on COVID. So the survey was out between August and the end of September. So some key things coming out, is quite interesting things coming out. So for some people, COVID has been quite a positive move. Some people within the survey felt that working from home was really positive. It was something that they couldn't have done before. Maybe the organisation hadn't thought working from home is something that you can do in your role, but actually because of COVID, because of shielding, that's had to happen, and people have found that it's been beneficial. But equally, working from home for some people has created loneliness, has presented challenges. So you had an office where you had all the equipment that you needed set up, and then you're at home and that's not there for you at home. So there's been some challenges, but I'm trying to remember the data now. I can't remember, but I think it was around half of the people who filled in the survey said they had reasonable adjustments, and it had gone well, and I think around half had said it hadn't gone so well. So, but the data of that will come out in the report. I'm just trying to think of any other key things. We have looked at intersectionality. We're still doing the analysis of that, but we do want to say some things around disability and other protected characteristics too, and we'll be looking to analyse some of that in the report.
Yeah, but no, that's really good. Thank you, Christine. And I think, but just to back up what Susan was saying as well, I think one of the things we've seen across the board, isn't it, that there has actually been a greater willingness for people to declare their disability, whether it's for necessary reasons or whatever. It seems to have happened, and I think that's got to be a positive thing, because I mean, you'll all know that one of our big challenges, like many organisations and many people who are watching this will have, is around encouraging people to disclose or declare their disability to their employer. It's a common problem that we've got. So as you say, hopefully there's some positive things to come out of this lockdown that we're still going through. And also the networks. I'm going to go back to networks, Glyn. I'm going to ask you to talk to us about your network, because we know how important networks are for all protected characteristic groups, actually, but we know that they are particularly important for disabled staff, I think, and particularly during a pandemic situation like this, where many people, as Christine said, are perhaps feeling lonely or isolated or separated from their work colleagues. So tell us some more, Glyn, about your network at Cambridge University Hospitals. When was it established? How long has it been going? And what do you do with your co-chair to keep it going?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of this off the top of my head now. I haven't got anything written down about this at all. I became involved, I think it was about 18 months ago. I think I found it on one of our internet things that it was going to be started up. So of course I just threw myself in at it because I've always been advocate for disabled people, particularly with hearing loss. As I think we're quite a bit different to some others, but I've said before, other disabilities can be seen, mine wasn't. So I got involved with it and sort of became co-chair last year, just before our great big purple network light up the chimney. And then it kind of like COVID come along. Our meetings sort of dissipated for a time because we couldn't meet up. And we were kind of like scattered, some on site, some home working. So we sort of picked it up again, I think it was about April. So we're about a month into lockdown. We thought we'll give it a go, see what happens. And there's a lot of people saying that they're working from home and hadn't got this, hadn't got that. So we sort of said, well, okay, you get in touch with line managers, say exactly what you want. There is help out there, but unless you speak and say about it, they're not going to know. They think you're going to be quite cozied up on your bed or your settee with your laptop and managing on that. But if you need any other help, you need to actually get in touch with them. I managed to get a couple of bits myself out of it. They, sorry, this clicks out if I don't bring it back up. Right. I use the write up. I lost my co-chair just before the summer. She was another job, so sort of kind of like plodded along on my own for a couple of months and got used to actually speaking to people on Zoom. I feel a bit more confident now than I've been for a long while talking to you, because the confidence is coming with use. So I'm actually used to speaking on these now. First of all, it was, no, I'm not going to do this. I'd rather sit round a table than do on virtual, but I'm getting used to it and it's getting good for me. So we picked up then, and in the, I think, beginning of this, we did reverse mentoring training session, which I became involved in. And I have a reverse mentee of our hospital board. That's going quite well. We've had a couple of meetings. There again, COVID put paid to all plans that we'd already done for this. So I've done a couple of, I did WhatsApp calls actually. I hadn't got Zoom, it wasn't working. So we did WhatsApp calls, and I've got another one next week. So I will be back in touch with her again. She actually joined us for a Purple Network meeting last week, and we were talking about Purple Passport and the run out of that to try and find out what people are willing to disclose about their disabilities and to get it onto their staff records so that your line manager actually knows that and can help you with your disability. It's got to be rolled out. It's coming. We're getting there. But next big do will be light up again. It'll be great. That'll be my second one.
Oh yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing that chimney get lit up again.
It should be lit up later. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. And so, Chris, I just want to, you mentioned reverse mentoring as well, first of all. Can you just tell us, for those people perhaps who are watching don't know what reverse mentoring is, can you tell us what reverse mentoring is, and again, just tell us a bit about how it's worked within your organisation?
Yeah, so I suppose when people think of mentoring, they usually think of a senior member of staff mentoring a more junior member of staff to help them understand how they develop their career, how they can move their career on, help them to have insight, maybe share their experience and understand what I suppose what the experience of doing more senior roles might be like. Reverse mentoring is where, in that sense of, rather than trying to learn what it's like to do I suppose, a career at a higher level, it's using that approach to help you understand the experience that people with a protected characteristics, so maybe disabled staff or staff with long-term conditions, or as we did, it often started with BME staff, and actually having a more junior member of staff, I think, as Glyn was mentioning as well, usually starting with mentoring the board. So it's actually taking that board member and saying, look, for you to understand this experience, for you to get the insight to allow you to, I suppose, effectively be involved in an input to work around supporting disabled staff or supporting staff from BME or LGBTQ, that actually you get to understand, you get that insight from the experience of the person who's mentoring you. And giving you that insight. And as I said earlier, it's about, often the perspectives is just so different and people have never been exposed to that before. And I think some of my senior colleagues who've been through it have said it's the most revelatory experience of their working career, to actually, just get that insight that otherwise they could never have seen it from that perspective unless they'd had someone mentor them and share their experience. So I think it is really powerful, and as part of culture change, I think a number of trusts in the NHS are exploring that and looking to build on it. And I think it gains, as it has done in Northampton, it starts to gain a momentum. People are interested in it. They want to know more. They want to become someone who's going to be reverse mentored. So, I think it's quite an exciting thing that's developing in the NHS.
No, fantastic, thank you. And Susan, Glyn also mentioned health passports, and I know you've just launched one at Nelft as well. You're going to show us a copy, aren't you? Shameless advertising.
Here's one I prepared earlier, Glyn. We basically took it from the RCN template of health passports, and we sort of did some forums. We asked people to look at it and think about what would be useful for them. And we've not marketed it to any particular group of staff in Nelft. We've marketed it to everybody. Because it talks about, thinking about what times of day work better for you. Some of us are more alert in the morning, some of us in the afternoon, and just getting to people to really think about, when do they do their job best? Do they work better in a kind of noisy, busy environment, or do they need quiet spaces? And that's useful, I think, for all of us to think about. And then the idea is that you take it to supervision, and it forms the basis of some of the conversations you have with your supervisor, be that your line manager or your clinical supervisor. So it was kind of early days. We only launched it during the pandemic. So, we're really trying to encourage uptake of it at the moment. But people are very positive about it.
Good, brilliant. All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to draw the conversation to a close shortly. And before I do, I'm going to ask you one final question. I'm going to ask you for one thing that you'd like the NHS to do more of to create an inclusive environment for disabled people. And I'll come to you individually to ask you to give us your thoughts around that. And so I'm going to start with Christine, if you don't mind. What's your thoughts about that? What more could the NHS do to create a better and more inclusive environment for disabled staff and disabled people?
I think for me, it's talk. So it's the stories and it's the voices that are important, especially areas that are more hidden, like mental health. I think we need to be talking much more about mental health in the workplace and people's experiences. And people who talk about their lived experience of mental health have to overcome a barrier to be able to do that. So we need to support that, I would say, as much as possible as the NHS in trying to do that. I think as well, disability is everybody's business. And I think it's not just disabled people that need to speak out, but it's leaders who aren't disabled, who are allies and need to take responsibility for moving disability on. I think the other thing I would say is to talk pan disability, so talk about physical and mental health disability, and also hidden and visible disabilities, so that disability becomes a broad area. It is a broad area, and people recognise that broadness rather than thinking about disability in particular ways.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to come to you, Chris. I don't know if Christine's left anything for you to mention, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is about the stories. I think as we've mentioned, the reverse mentoring, I think it's maybe an expectation about how we have more of that, how we, that there's an expectation that there's an ongoing conversation, not just with senior staff, but with middle managers through the organisations. That's something that's often talked about. It's organisations, different ones will get commitment from the top and from enthusiastic staff, but actually it's having that core middle group of the organisation, the bulk of the organisation engaged in the conversations. And I think anything that promotes that, which is probably through the stories, through expecting more reverse mentoring, is a key part about changing the culture, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. Glyn, what are your final thoughts for people? What do you think will change and make a better environment for disabled staff within the NHS?
Basically for line managers, middle management, anybody to actually understand us, disabled people, to listen to the stories, the voices that we're now doing within our group, so people know, and to really listen. I think that is it. It is to really listen. They don't. It goes too quickly, and then it's on to something else. I think it needs to be listened. No, just for them to listen, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And finally, Susan.
I think all of the above. And I think be courageous, be bold. I think if the last year has taught us nothing else, it's that the kind of change that we never dreamed was possible in the NHS is possible. We can do things without having 100 committees taking 2 years. We can make change happen really quickly. We can work in new ways. And I think we've got that momentum. I think for staff with disabilities, I think it's an opportunity to drive through some of the change and the culture shift that we've been waiting for a long time.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you for participating in the conversation, and have a happy Purple Light Up Day.